Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk on your favorite channel, Huda TV. I'm your host, Arkham Rashid. Approaching every situation with a negative mentality leads to a depressing lifestyle. That's why in today's episode we want to talk about being optimistic and living a lifestyle full of optimism. So I'm going to start off by allowing my guests to introduce themselves and welcoming them to the show. On my right hand side, brother, if you could introduce yourself.
My name is Idris Surat. American, living in Egypt at the moment, teaching and studying at the same time.
All right, Idris, it's nice to have you on again. We've had you on for many episodes and it's been a wonderful conversation always.
Yes, it's always a pleasure to come back.
Brother, if we can have you give us your name, a little bit about yourself.
I'm Omar Khalid. I work as a translator and I'm Egyptian. And this is the first time I appear here.
I know this is the first time I'm with you on the show. Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation. And
it's a pleasure.
Inshallah, it'll be a good one. On this side, brother, if you can introduce yourself.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ilyas Townsend. I'm here in Egypt. Inshallah, trying to start my studies and I teach online, so yeah.
Okay, Ilyas, it's wonderful having you on again.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's always fun having you, Idris, Bilal, and now we got a new guest as well. Brother, if you can give the audience a little bit of information about yourself.
Well, my name is Bilal Abdullah, married, live in Egypt. I'm a teacher and a student as well.
All right, so after all of you guys have introduced yourselves, let's get into our topic, which is optimism. So obviously, we want to start off by defining optimism. Optimism can be something else for somebody else. So if Idris, you can give us, what does optimism mean to you?
Optimism to me is basically, from what I've learned from a lot of my teachers, that it means basically always thinking in the best, in the sense of regardless of what happens, believe that, having hope and that something good will come at the end. Not believing that, the doom is to come, and always having this mentality of no matter what comes. This is basic of optimism.
So that's a very good way of looking at it, and especially because as Muslims we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already decided everything for us. So we should always be hopeful that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has planned the best for us. Go ahead, brother, if you can share what optimism means to you.
Sure. Well, optimism actually was very important in the West since the 1960s. They made a lot of studies, and psychologists made a lot of experiments, like Martin Seligman. In 1965, he made an experiment on dogs and maybe after that we can talk in details. But in general, he reached to the conclusion that in order to be an optimist, you have to do opposite of thinking about problems as being permanent or being pervasive, or being personalization of the problems, So you do the opposite. Think about problems as they are not going to be permanent. They are not pervasive. They are not going to affect everything in your life. Just in this position specifically, if I failed an exam, for instance, I don't say that I'm a failure in everything. So I specify it. And don't personalize. Think about circumstances as maybe they can change, and I'm not the problem. So
that's very interesting, actually. We can actually get into that after everybody introduces what optimism means to themselves. Ilyas, if I can ask you, what does optimism mean to you?
Yeah, I think optimism and positivity are linked. And just as our brother mentioned, Martin Seligman actually had to do some research on him for my dissertation in university, and the whole concept of positive psychology. You're always looking for the best in whatever happens. So he said, if you fail your exams, the way Martin Seligman looked at it, he said, well, instead of saying, okay, I got an F, he said, well, there's room for improvement. Well, if you get an F, there's obviously a lot of room for improvement. But for me, like, optimism is being positive about the end result. I mean, it's kind of hard to. All of the answers are going to be very similar. All of our answers are going to be very similar. But if you're looking at the best result and knowing that you're able to achieve it. So in a slightly different way, I've perceived optimism to be having confidence in yourself, and as you mentioned earlier on, in the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
All right, Bilal, if we can get your thoughts on optimism.
For me, optimism is patience, right? And I've learned optimism, I think, in the last few years. It's not easy. And why do I call it patience? I call it patience because we face problems in our life, and sometimes we get down on ourselves, and we say to ourselves, okay, it's not going to happen, or it's never going to happen, or whatever the case may be. And I mean, what do we need optimism for? We need optimism because we may have a situation where we feel bad about something. So for me, it's about patience with whatever is happening to you.
That's very interesting. For me, just to share some thoughts with you guys, I believe optimism is when you take a look at every single situation and you try to find the good and the best in that situation. And an interesting thing I read in one of the stress management books was, well, now I use it a lot here in Egypt, it was talking about, you know, how...
Why?
Yeah, why?
Are you stressed here in Egypt?
Yeah, so it was speaking basically about when you're stuck in traffic and, you know, your car's not rolling and you're stuck in traffic and you're going to get stressed out. Now, how can you take the good from this situation? So the lady who wrote the book actually said, well, whether you're stressed or not, you're still going to be stuck in that traffic. That's the way you look at that traffic. So you can change your whole mindset and look at it in a positive way. Take the time to meditate, close your eyes, relax. You know, take that time to enjoy yourself instead of looking, oh man, I'm stuck in traffic, this is going to take 2 hours, and you keep stressing yourself and stressing yourself. Whether or not you're stressed or you're positive about the situation, you're sitting in that traffic. So it's the way you approach the situation, and to me that's what optimism is, how we approach each and every situation in our life.
That's what I said, patience. But you said it more eloquently than I did.
All right, now basically now what I want to do is take optimism through an Islamic lens. So how can we relate this to our religion? If we can start with you, Ilyas.
Again, if you look at the Prophet it's a really good example actually is in the time of the Battle of the Trench, and this was of all times when a person would be pessimistic. And subhanAllah, if you look at the hypocrites, they were talking about the Prophet's reaction to it. The Prophet ﷺ was saying things like, I'm promising the keys of Persia and the keys of Rome, and you know, he's promising different Sahaba, different things. And the hypocrites were saying, well, how can he be saying these things and we don't even feel safe to go to the toilet?
Yeah.
SubhanAllah. So in that difficult situation, we find the Prophet ﷺ was still being optimistic, and it really embodies everything of what we were saying today. He was patient in that situation, as Bilal mentioned, and in your case, you know, it was making sense of the situation and looking at it, and also looking at what's going to happen in the future. So for us as Muslims, you know, the optimism in the sense that we know that Allah wants the best for us, and we know that even in these difficult situations that there's still reward to be gained from it. There's rewards that can benefit us in the hereafter. So no matter how difficult the situation, the Prophet ﷺ told us that, you know, even if you're pricked by a thorn, it's still a means of gaining reward from Allah. So optimism really is something that is very important. I don't know if we're going to touch on this earlier on, but the opposite of optimism is actually a means of earning Allah's anger. If you're pessimistic, then a person sometimes just does whatever they want, which sometimes can just involve haram. So it's very important for us to be optimistic in no matter how difficult the situation is, whatever happens in our lives. Islam is telling us to be optimistic because Allah's looking out for you. And all of this was written down, you know, 50,000 years before Allah created. So, you know, optimism has a great part in Islam. It's part of the characteristics of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was always positive. You never found him being negative. Okay, this is going to happen. No, we're going to die, or you know, have this. But Islam really shapes things.
And like you can find it in the roots of our religion.
Yeah.
We're told whether something good happens to you or something bad happens to you, you always say Alhamdulillah.
Always say Alhamdulillah.
Whether it's good or bad. So it's always there to tell us that hope is always there.
Of course, yes.
You know, Bilal, if I can get your thoughts on that, how can you relate it to Islam?
Well, I think just overall in general with etiquette and manners with people that you're dealing with on a daily basis, when people are, we all know, you can look at someone and tell that this person is a pessimist, right? Yeah. Because of how they talk and how they act and how they're treating other people. They're always angry and they're never satisfied. And why are you looking at him? Is that this guy? No, I'm just joking. But
it's me.
Because when a person is like that, what they're actually doing is making their problems worse, right? And sometimes they're even blocking the blessings from Allah and anything else that may receive of good because they're putting other people off, right? And people like that make their problems worse, and that's why I mentioned patience. When you're patient, when you're calm, when you're peaceful, when you're at rest, when you see something, when something bad is happening or something that's happening that you did not intend, and you are at peace with that, right? Even if you don't get a good result out of it, at the very least, you get the good attitude and the good character, and people see that, and Allah sees that, and it just gives you a better character as a human being.
Yeah, I mean, it's very true. Like, it almost relates to every single thing in Islam, every single aspect.
It's very important actually because
Yeah,
now what the brother was talking about here is that you see what's under your control, because sometimes we all face conflicts and it's inevitable. We are going to face problems in our lives. So you see that we have two circles in our lives. One circle we cannot affect. It happens to us like maybe our childhood, maybe somebody was abused, maybe somebody went to a college that he didn't want to go to because of the circumstances of the environment and so on. But maybe these things in the past you cannot change. It's going to make you, sad and depressed, and you will think about things that you cannot change. So think about the now and here, what I can do right now in the moment.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Okay, and that's one of the things I've noticed. When you change that aspect of your life, when you start, say you did something wrong and you figured out, I shouldn't have done it this way. Now, there's no use of sitting there and constantly, destroying your mind that you've done it wrong, you've done it wrong, you've done it wrong. Now you need to look at, how can I fix it? How can I, when the next situation arises, how can I take care of it? That's what you need to be focusing on. So instead of just sitting there and beating yourself up about how you did this wrong and how you should have done it better.
Just wasting my energy.
Because it's done. It's in the past.
Like, just to talk about what you just said, and I'll bring it to something else, is that what the Prophet ﷺ told us, that one of the worst things a Muslim can do is start playing the if game.
Yeah.
This is a whole nother talk in itself, but I just was thinking about what you said, and this is something that you shouldn't do. When something is done, khalas, it's done. Don't dwell on it, don't make it, learn from it, but don't make it like, only if I had done this or I had done this. Don't do that. Learn from it and move on. Consider the now and the future, but the past is done. And just to move on to what you're saying, how I relate it to Islam is that, for me, when I think of optimism, I immediately think of hope. It's almost like, the better, easier translation for me is hope in Islam, because as I had in a previous show with Brother Ilyas reminded us before, that the best definition I've ever heard was Ibn al-Qayyim, where he talked about describing hope as one of the wings of a bird. Love is the head, and the wings are between fear and hope. And this is how we live through life. If you have too much hope, you will fly in circles. You will get nowhere, or you won't be able to fly steady. If you have too much fear, the same thing.
And it's
a balance.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. That's exactly how the Prophet ﷺ has told us to live our life, between fear and hope. Exactly how you're describing it. The fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will He accept my good deeds? Will He allow me to go into Jannah? Will He, take this zakah from me? Will He, and just reminds me quickly, not to go off of topic, but there was an ayah in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the people who give zakah, and when they give zakah, their hearts tremble and they're worried.
Yes, I know that.
And Aisha asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, are these the people who give charity and then do evil deeds and do these evil actions? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, no, these are the people who are righteous men and women. And when they give this charity, they're worried, will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept this from me or not? Will He accept my deed? And that's how every Muslim should be. When you do a good deed, nowadays we think like, okay, I've prayed, that's it. I'm on top of my game. I prayed, I gave my zakah, I've done all my 5 pillars, I've done some extra stuff. Look at how the companions were. When they gave that charity, they were worried. وَجِلَتْ وَقُلُوبُهُمْ وَجِلَةٌ. Their hearts were trembling. Will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept this from me? Will He do this? This is more important than doing the deed. The acceptance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that balance has to kick in there, and the hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept it, and the hope that He will let us enter Jannah, inshallah. Ameen. Before we actually move on with this discussion, we're going to watch a short video, so stay tuned.
The talk you're about to hear is based on decades of psychological research by Martin Seligman, who founded the field of positive psychology. Seligman discovered that our internal explanations about life events impact us in profound ways. In the next 5 minutes, I'm going to show you how to reassess your own internal explanations and improve your life. Since I'm from SurveyMonkey, let's start with a quick survey. Who here has ever bombed an interview? Looks like a lot of us. I surveyed 60 of my colleagues and discovered that 3/4 of them had had a bad interview, but the way they described their experiences varied greatly. Now, if your friend walked out of a bad interview and said, "I'm just terrible under pressure," you'd probably think that was pretty pessimistic. But what exactly makes an explanation optimistic or pessimistic? Well, Seligman identified 3 important factors: permanence, pervasiveness, and personalization. The 3 Ps. When adversity strikes, the higher your explanation scores on the 3 Ps, the more pessimistic it is. So when your friend says, "I'm just terrible under pressure," that's permanent because it's hard to change your response to pressure. It's pervasive because it will affect a lot of things in your friend's life. And it's a personal trait tied to your friend, high on all 3 Ps. An optimist might say, "They just asked me questions outside my experience." That's not permanent, pervasive, and it's not terribly personalized either. For optimists, obstacles seem short-lived and changeable. Now, when we switch to positive events, the 3 Ps actually become an advantage. Imagine you got the interview. An optimist might say, "I got the job because I'm really smart." Intelligence is a permanent personal trait with pervasive impact on your life. A pessimist might say, "They just couldn't find anyone more qualified than me." For pessimists, success seems like a fluke, and their personal flaws feel massive and insurmountable. Now here's where things get really interesting. Optimists are more successful at academics, work, and sports. They're physically healthier, they live longer, and they're less susceptible to depression. But does optimism cause all of this good stuff, or is it the other way around? Well, surprisingly, Seligman discovered that when pessimists learn to take on an optimistic explanatory style, they actually gain all of the benefits of natural optimists. And now I'm going to show you how to make that change. When adversity strikes and we experience a negative emotional consequence, there's a belief linking these 2 things together. So our first job is to listen to our internal monologue and identify those beliefs. So let's apply that to our failed interview. I bombed my interview, adversity. I felt miserable afterwards, emotional consequence. But what was the linking belief? I was thinking, "I'm a terrible engineer. I'm never going to get a job. No one will love me. I'm going to die alone." Totally PPP. Now, if a crazy person had said all these things to me, I wouldn't have paid any attention. But we have this tendency to believe our internal monologues, even when they're not very logical or rational. So our second job is to take a step back and dispute those irrational beliefs. And here are 5 tools to help. 1, decatastrophize. Is it really the end of the world? Examine the possibility that your beliefs are blown out of proportion. A failed interview doesn't mean I'm going to die alone. 2, look for counter-evidence. Say my internal monologue says I'm terrible under pressure. Can I disprove this somehow? What about that time I gave a talk in front of a giant room full of people? 3, look for less pessimistic alternative explanations. So nothing in life is going to have a single cause. Another valid explanation for a poor interview might be that they were looking for someone a lot more senior than you, not your fault. 4, focus on the things that you can change. It may well be the case that I'm not very good at interviews right now, but beating myself up about that isn't going to help me get a job. Instead, I should be practicing my job interview skills so I can do better next time. Woo! And 5, accept compliments with an open mind. Personal praise like, "You're really smart," can clash with a pessimist's worldview. Instead of dismissing or denying those compliments out of hand, practice accepting them graciously. So in short, adjusting your explanatory style can help you become more optimistic.
Before we watched that short video clip, we were speaking about optimism through an Islamic lens. So we want to continue with that conversation, but now start with some examples from maybe the companions or the prophets. So we'll let Brother Idris start us off. Go ahead.
For me, I guess the first person I think of as far as from the companions is Abu Bakr. There was nobody from the companions that had more optimism, more hope than this man in many ways. I mean, he was the first to believe, and he always knew that the Prophet ﷺ would lead them in the best. Every time he made a decision, he said if the Prophet ﷺ said it, then that's the way to go. Because he knew, he had hope, and he believed that whatever he said is the right way. And I can't think of, there's many examples of this. I could talk for hours about his examples, but rather than
we got a couple of questions to go through. Umar, if you can share with us.
I just wanted to comment on what the brother was saying about the F game, playing the F game.
Yeah.
Actually, in the same hadith, in the same tradition of the Prophet, he was saying the solution of this in the beginning of it. So that the strong believer is better than the weak believer, right? And the description was that you احرص على ما ينفعك, you seek what benefits you, واستعن بالله, and seek the help and support of Allah, ولا تعجز, and don't be helpless. So this is actually going to be the description of how to get out of the F game. Deal with what can benefit you at the moment. Can you work out now? Can you have spare time you can benefit from? Can you take a course in something that you always wanted to attend in the past? So try to fill your time with these beneficial stuff. And immediately every bad thought is going to go away, because cognition and behavior, they are interrelated. Because sometimes we think that we need to be motivated to do something. It goes the opposite way too. That if we do something, we're going to be happy. We're going to be motivated to do it again.
And if the Prophet ﷺ said it, then
And this is the basis of tawakkul. This is what we have lots of shows on that. This is the basis of tawakkul. Doing. So.
Umar, now if you can share with us an example or something that came to your mind.
Oh yeah. The point that I was talking about before, that was in the video about Martin Seligman in 1960s when he made an experiment. He brought two groups of dogs. One of the group of the dogs, he just left them inside a cage, and the second group, they were inside a cage which was closed, and he electrocuted them. He started to give them, horrible shocks of electricity and so on. But the dogs wanted to go and escape from the cage, but they didn't have any outlet to go from. So after multiple times of being electrocuted, the dogs just gave up. They were electrocuted and they didn't go to go outside of the cage. But this is not the end of the experiment. Martin Seligman opened an outlet of the cage and electrocuted them. They were seeing the outlet in front of their very eyes, but they didn't go up. So when he electrocuted the other dogs who they didn't have any experiments of that electrocution or anything, so they escaped immediately. Why? Because they learned helplessness. Helplessness now was ingrained inside their brains. So the same point I was talking about before, if I was abused, if I was treated by my peers in a negative way, was bullied, so I think that I cannot control anything. So this negative mentality actually is the root cause of depression. So we have to just do the opposite. Think about that you can control stuff. Things are under your control also.
And I mean, that experiment shows the reality of many people's situation, that they try and try and try, and then after that they just give up. They no longer want to try. They no longer see that there can be any hope, and they just end up giving up. Elias, if I can come to you, if you can share with us an example or two from the prophets or the companions.
When I think about optimism, one of the things that came to my mind was the Hudaybiyah. Because you have to look at the historical backdrop. The Muslims had been expelled from Makkah, the place where they were born and they were raised. The Muhajirin anyway, they were born and raised in Makkah. They grew up seeing the Kaaba. They had this attachment to it, and they're expelled. And so years later, when Islam is ingrained in their lives and they love their new faith, and they're with the Prophet ﷺ on their way to perform Umrah, and then the Quraysh turn around and they say, you're not allowed in and you have to go back. And imagine they're in Ihram, they're ready to go and see the Kaaba again. It's been years, and then they're told you're not allowed to come back. And then at that point, the Prophet ﷺ and the Quraysh, they made an agreement, and the agreements on the face of it would appear they weren't really in favor of Islam.
Yeah.
You know, they had to hand over the prisoners if if people left Mecca and went to Medina, the Prophet had to send them back. But if the Prophet ﷺ, if people left Mecca and went to Medina, the Quraysh wouldn't have to send them back. And there are a lot of terms that wasn't really favorable. And then at this point, you know, Umar radiallahu anhu was upset because the terms didn't appear to be, you know, favorable to Muslims. So he said to the Prophet ﷺ, are you not the messenger of Allah? Are we not Muslims? Do we not have Allah on our side, etc.? But even in that situation, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, you know, it's not me. I didn't make that. Allah told me to do this essentially. And in that situation where it was so difficult for the Prophet ﷺ, it was very difficult for him, but he was very optimistic that, you know, things were going to come in the right situation. And the Sahaba were so upset that they didn't get to make Umrah. When the Prophet ﷺ said, okay, we have to go back now, they didn't want to take off the ihram. And the Prophet ﷺ's wife had to say, look, cut your hair, and then people will know we have to go back now. And then imagine that. So that's happened. But then years later, you know, Islam, during that time when the Hudaybiyah was broken, then Islam has flourished, and they went back to Makkah even stronger. Yeah. You know, so if you think about it, this was great optimism by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because that situation was very difficult. One of this main chief, Umar ibn Khattab, in front of everyone, was saying, well, what's happening? Yeah. You know, but the Prophet was optimistic that Allah will bring his promise true. Right now.
And a very important lesson we can drive from that situation is that sometimes when we look at things up front, we don't see the wisdom behind it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has planned for us. But there is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has planned, and that's the hope that we need to look for. So before we continue our conversation, we're going to go for a short break, so I want you guys to stay tuned. We went for that short break, we were speaking about optimism, and now we want to get into surrounding yourself with an optimistic environment and people. So I'm going to let Brother Bilal start us off.
Okay. Well, I don't have any canine torture stories, but I think in a way we torture ourselves, because when we have a lack of optimism, what happens is these emotions have a physical effect upon the body. I'm actually only 36 years old, but I had a stroke when I was 25 from stressing about certain life things. I wanted this thing to go this way and this thing to go that way, and maybe things weren't happening as quickly as I wanted them to, or in the way that I wanted them to. And as you were saying earlier, you're keeping these things on your mind, and it's there, and you just either foaming at the mouth or just fuming in the mind about something again and again and again. And that has a real effect on the body, and you know, and that's where the patience comes in. I mean, everything that we know from our religion in regards to how we should act and how we should be, it does have a real benefit for the mind and the body. And Islam is just guiding us to how we should be, because Allah knows our bodies better than we do, and how we can maintain ourselves. And I was a person that really I kind of beat myself up over even the smallest thing. And I had to learn the hard way to, you know, to be a person, to not let everything worry me that Allah is in control, I'm not. To, you know, put forth my best effort, right? But at the same time, leave the rest to Allah. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It wasn't meant to be. And to just, more or less, that no matter what happens, to be a more happier, optimistic individual, patient upon your situation, and look forward to what's ahead.
That's some interesting thoughts. Idris, if I can come over to you and let you speak a little bit about, you know, keeping an optimistic environment, surrounding yourself with optimistic people.
I think it's very important not to be around pessimistic people.
Yeah, of course. Negative people bring negative energy.
No matter what, they will affect you, and it takes a toll on you. So it's important to be around like-minded people who have the right kind of optimism, the right kind of hope. Of course, there's a bad kind of hope. You don't want the person who they live their life solely on hope. You know, the ulama have divided hope into three ways. There's two good hopes, and there's a bad hope. You know, one of the two good ones is the one who hopes that what he does is accepted, the good that he does is accepted. Another good one is that the mistakes that I make, I hope that they're forgiven. And the bad one is the one who does whatever he wants because he knows that Allah is merciful and He'll forgive me. His hope doesn't lead him to good.
Yeah, his hope isn't balanced by that fear.
So it's not balanced.
Excuse
this is
now.
a bad way of having hope.
I know a lot of folks like that right now. Some names just popped into my mind.
So you want to have that balance and try to have people around you who, when you find yourself losing it, they can remind you, don't worry, you know, and pull you up. And when they're down, you pull them up. Because if you're around someone who's, and unfortunately in this part of the world, there's a lot of pessimistic people, and they have a way of bringing you down without even knowing they're doing it. And it's sort of like the norm for them. When someone dies, they come and remind them about the person 24/7. When a wife loses her husband, they don't like console her. They kind of reminding them about him, and you know, and the day after, as if she's, you know, didn't just lose him. You know, give her a break, give her time to grieve. And
some people just roll that way, just in a negative.
They do.
Just in a negative manner.
I've heard someone told me once that to not be around pessimistic people because they have a problem for every solution.
Yeah.
You know, and that's how they roll, I guess.
That's a very interesting way of putting it, actually, a problem for every solution.
Yeah. Because someone says, let's do this thing.
Yeah.
It sounds great. It'll work. Yeah, okay, good. Let's do it.
But what if this thing happens?
Right. And the other person comes and says, no, we can't do that because of this. No, that won't work because of that. Those are people, they just, no matter what you build, they destroy it. They knock it down.
Maybe there is something here also. I think because we are affected by materialism also here in the Muslim world, and because we are open to the whole world, you know. So I think we have to think about achievements as not the destination. It's not that something I just have to get. I just have to work something to get married to a certain girl, and that's it. I'm going to be happy with this thing, and I'm going to be sad if I don't get it. No, you just be happy with the journey itself.
Yeah,
the journey itself.
And I think it has something to do with earlier on the experiment that you were mentioning, that some people, once they lose hope, you know, after so many years of depression, so many years of oppression, there's no hope. The people are just pessimistic after that. They don't see anything.
They have the wrong mentality.
And unfortunately, they shouldn't be, because they have the best example in this part of the world. Islam has, you know, some of the most amazing examples of not being like this, but unfortunately, it's not something that's really applied and thought about and learned how to apply it in your life. They don't have a way of making it a reality, even though they have the best of examples.
You know, one effect of having a total loss of optimism is, especially in the West, when people have no optimism or any hope in the future, it leads them to suicide.
Yeah.
And even especially around the holidays, they kill themselves. We have in the West, someone can be a rich person, had everything their whole life, and they have $25 million, they invest $10 million, they lose it, and they kill themselves, but they still had $15 million. And they just can't handle the stress of losing something. And that's very unfortunate, but it's the reality of life.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Ilyas, if you can shed some light on, you know, keeping an optimistic environment, surrounding yourself with optimistic people.
Yeah, I mean, as they say, we are products of our environment, you know, and sometimes a loss of optimism or a loss of an optimistic environment sometimes can lead a person to destruction. And Brother Bilal mentioned, you know, suicide rates in Western countries. It's quite alarming. I remember we were talking about this on the car up here, I think, on the last show, and I was saying it's very strange. You would think that people in poor countries would commit suicide.
Oh yeah, I remember this.
Because they don't have what they see on TV. It's like the gap between rich and poor is amazing. You have to visit the third world to see it. You know, you feel guilty sometimes coming out of the shop with
some chips.
Yeah, a whole bag of chips. You know,
some people roll like that. They buy a lot of food and they don't want to give to anybody. That's just how it happens, and they don't feel any remorse. Subhanallah.
Yes. Yeah. So. Yeah, so the suicide rates are, you know, extremely high because people lose optimism. It's because, you know, without optimism, you're always dealing in failure. You you know, you feel like a failure, you know, but it's about seeing the end result. Because if you think about it, obviously the role of prophets were not to convert people, so to spread the message. But if they had the mindset of, if I don't convert these people, I'm deemed as a failure. If it's a numbers game, then all of the prophets were failures.
Yeah.
Because only Yusuf alayhi salam,
Blasphemy.
only Yusuf alayhi salam and Ilyas, there's in the Quran, there's very few numbers of prophets whose people believed. But all of those peoples were destroyed. But it's not, the end game isn't in our hands, in Allah's hands. You know,
And the prophets, the messenger's job isn't to convey.
it's not to it's to convey.
Convey
It's
the
not to
message.
convey, it's to convey. So if we look at it, if we just look at things from a completely numerical way of, okay, like Bilal mentioned, the person lost 2 million, I'm gonna just kill myself and, you know, throw myself off a large building, you know, then you're always dealing in failure. But Islam doesn't require success, it requires the input. That's what's important. You know, I could write a book, and if my intention was pure, I'll get rewarded for that book. But on the other hand, I could write a book with a corrupt intention. People could benefit from it, and I don't get anything for it.
It isn't the end product that matters.
It's
It's
not
the
the end
journey
product.
that gets you there.
It's the input.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
the input. And optimism really is the key in the input. You know, we want the best, and that best comes from Allah at the end of the day. So really, optimism is really linked with qadr and having full belief that everything that was written has happened, and Allah has written the best for you.
And being in peace with it,
Yeah.
All right, so now I want to give each one of you brothers a chance just to give a little bit of advice to the viewers about being optimistic in this life and the hereafter. Go ahead, brother Idris.
My best advice would be is that if you don't see it or don't understand it, give it a try and make it a habit, and you will not regret it. Start seeing things, you know, in a better light. Start, if something that happens that you don't particularly like, or you're disappointed in something, start moving past it and finding good ways to look at the thing and force yourself, if you have to
look at it in a
to the
positive.
point where it comes to it more naturally, you will find yourself at ease, at peace. You know, and then tell yourself that, you know, even we have the saying that, you know, Allah is what you think of Him. So think good and hope for the best ending, and know that it will come to you if you want it, if you work for it.
Subhanallah. How about you, Brother Amr?
My advice is to evaluate the world in its place. You know, we don't just try to make the world as it's the end, and this is, if I'm not happy in this world, this is the end. No, because some people, maybe they are going to be having miserable lives, some of them, but in the end, the everlasting life is what matters. So I'm not saying to leave this world or not to do what you have to do, but what if I have problems that I cannot change? I just think about this world as it's not permanent. Just don't, you know, think about it too much to harm yourself. You know?
And miserable is just a concept of something that you perceive. So for example, somebody could have nothing, and we could think that person's miserable, but if that person is content and he's very optimistic and he's happy about his life, then he's not miserable at all.
No.
Whereas I can have everything in the world and everybody could think I'm happy, but I could be miserable. So it's just a concept, you know, that the way we perceive our life, you know, if we're being optimistic or not.
The example is all of these movie stars and singers in the West
I was just about to say that.
who are just, I mean, we don't need to say any names, but look at them. Their lives are crumbling right before our eyes, and they're just for the newspapers now, or the internet.
And it's unfortunate. Ilyas, if I can ask you to, you know, share some advice, give us some.
Some of us are being optimistic is really, I would say, just to really work on our relationships with Allah. You know, and Prophet Idris mentioned the word tawakkul before. And for me, tawakkul is a big part of optimism, because tawakkul is that you do what you need to do and then you leave the rest to Allah. You know, we don't want to be too optimistic and not do anything. You know, khalas, Allah will provide, or it's, no, I don't need to revise for the exam, Allah will help me. No, we do what we do, we do our best, and then we leave the rest to Allah. So things like tawakkul, having fear of Allah, hoping Allah, all of these actions of the heart really should improve our optimism in for issues in this life and obviously issues in the hereafter, and also read on the lives of the Prophet. Allah told us, He gave us these stories for us to reflect, and there's so many examples of when it just at that point where it seems like everything's going to fail, that's when Allah's help comes. You know, so we should be optimistic in the sense that when it gets to the worse it gets, the closer Allah's help is. You know, and that's how we need to view things, you know, in this life and and obviously for issues to do with our hereafter.
That's a very good way of looking at it. You know, the worse it gets, the closer Allah's help is. Subhanallah. Brother Bilal, if we can go to you and ask for your advice to the viewers.
My thing is this: put yourself fully in the Deen of Allah. If you study this beautiful religion, study Tawheed, study who Allah is, right? Study about His prophets, the companions of the Rasul and their lives. And you will, the more you go into it and you learn and you study and you're around those who are also doing the same thing, you will find inspirations everywhere from this religion that will keep you optimistic. You will also learn an appreciation for what the prophets and the companions and other righteous people in the past, what they went through, right? And you will learn that, wait a minute, what did Ibn Taymiyyah go through? What did Ibn Hanbal go through? What I'm going through is really nothing compared to this person and that one and this one, right? And you learn to appreciate what you have more and your situation more, and you stop complaining, and you start realizing that, you know what, I really don't have it that bad after all. It could be a lot worse. And if you're around people who think like that, eventually your mind and your heart will manufacture this optimism for itself.
Okay, you know, all you guys had some very interesting points today on today's episode. I really enjoyed, you know, this conversation. It was wonderful. I mean, we had laughs. It was very educational. I mean, I learned many things starting from that experiment to, you know, different ways of looking at optimism, subhanAllah. So I want to thank you
just guys. Don't kill the animals to do it.
Of course not. So I want to thank you guys for, you know, coming out here, joining us on Let's Talk. So once again, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Dear viewers, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode, and I hope you guys benefited from today's episode. So let's try to make our lives a positive one, and let's try to add optimism to our daily schedules. Other than that, I will see you guys next Monday on Let's Talk at 6 p.m. Egyptian time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
From one brand or service